Optimal health for high performers. This is the Health Upgrade Podcast with Dr. Nawaz Habib.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Health Upgrade Podcast. I'm here with JP. How are you, sir?
I'm doing really well. Thanks.
Wonderful. This episode of the Health Upgrade Podcast is brought to you by Truvaga. Have you been looking for a simple way to feel calmer, think clearer, and sleep better? Imagine achieving this with just 2 minutes a day. I'm excited to introduce you to Truvaga, a handheld device that supports your nervous system through gentle vagus nerve stimulation. As a doctor specializing in functional health and wellness, I've seen firsthand how Truvaga has accelerated healing in my clients. I've used this device to help people with a range of issues, from sleep disturbances and heart palpitations to digestive dysfunction, nervous system imbalances, and mental wellness concerns. The results have honestly been remarkable. Truvaga is designed to catalyze and accelerate the shift in your body from fight or flight to rest, digest, and recover mode, helping you manage stress, maintain mental clarity, and unwind more easily. It's not just theory. I've witnessed its positive impact on real people facing real health challenges. The best part? Truvaga fits seamlessly into your routine. No need to carve out hours for wellness. Just 2 minutes a day can make a difference. It's a small investment of time for potentially significant benefits in how you feel and function each day. If you're curious to experience Truvaga for yourself, visit truvaga.com/upgrade. You can save $30 on your device by using the code UPGRADE30 at checkout. Remember, that's truvaga.com, truvaga.com/upgrade. It might just be the first step towards a calmer, clearer you, just as it has been for many of my clients. So we've kind of come across this topic in a quick and short period of time, but we think it's a topic that is going to be of very high value to a lot of people, and that is, what are the top wearable health metrics that most people will benefit from utilizing today based on the technology that is currently available? We'll talk about devices. We're not worried about any particular one. We're not generally sponsored by any one of these. There's not really any affiliation. So we can talk about this very freely. And I think this is a really great way for us to discuss specific markers that wearable health metrics are helping to provide with regards to your health on a day-to-day basis, minute to minute, second to second, hour to hour, and tell us about functionality and very important functions of our body and where we may not hear those whispers, but these devices can truly help us see where things are going right and where they're going wrong, and to create positive habit and behavioral change. So I'm excited to dig into this with you.
It sounds like a good topic. And as we sort of prep for this, which we did over about a period of about 4 minutes, we want to make sure everybody really recognizes we're not endorsing any given product. We may mention some product names, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're endorsing those. We're really talking about metrics and things that we want to see and that you as a practitioner would want to see in any patient you're working with. So if you're a biohacker or you're just interested in your health and you want to be able to have access to some information, we're going to talk to you about what these metrics are and why they're important. And then we may mention some devices that you can acquire that provide it, but they're certainly not the only ones that do it.
Absolutely. I would love to get started with some relatively simple devices. These are incredibly non-invasive. They're truly wearable devices. You can wear them on your hand, on your wrist, or on your chest. And these are devices that help to track your sleep, your activity, and your heart functionality, and have a lot of very important markers that come out of those. So the first ones that I want to dig into are things like the rings, the bands and watches, and chest straps. So Ultrahuman ring is another one. There's a few of these rings. The Samsung Galaxy ring is coming out. And then on top of that, just a good overlay are things like the Whoop band, the BioStrap, the Apple Watch, Fitbit, Garmin devices that are wrist-based.
Yeah, just to mention one, there's a company called Wolf Notch, and they make a watch that has some interesting, it can take your blood pressure. It can also take blood glucose, non-invasive blood glucose measurement. and just really interesting stuff to be able to look at.
So with these devices, I completely agree. But with these devices, I want to point to a couple of really important things. The first metric that I think is of highest value that these devices are helping to provide is heart rate variability, HRV. Okay. Just for those who don't know what HRV is, it's something we talk a lot about on the podcast. It's very heavily linked to vagus nerve and autonomic nervous system functionality and measurements. Do you mind giving a little bit of an overview with regards to what HRV is? I talk about it a lot in all of my talks, but I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah. And we did an episode about it. But in summary, basically, your heart doesn't beat in a metronomic pattern. It's not supposed to beat like once every second, almost like to the millisecond. There's got to be variability. And it's totally normal when you inhale versus exhaling. You ever watch, somebody who's like shooting at a shooting range. They learn to control their breathing. People shooting free throws. You learn to control your breathing because you want to be able to move and do the thing like shoot an arrow or a bullet or a free throw. You want to do that at a point where there's minimal disturbance coming from your body. And that's controlled by your autonomic nervous system. So what you're doing is you're controlling your variability in the frequency with which your heart is beating. And there's lots of different aspects to that. There's a high frequency component. There's a low frequency component. Ideally want to have a long enough track of an ECG so you can take that measurement. But it's funny because you sort of introduced it as something that is really about your heart, but it's really not so much about your heart. It's more about your autonomic nervous system. And it's not even necessarily so much about that. It's also about the inflammation state in your body, because inflammation is affected by and affects your autonomic nervous system. And your autonomic nervous system is really what's driving your heart rate variability. So it's a great way to measure how your body is functioning at a really deeply fundamental level.
Yeah, I think HRV is probably the best marker when it comes to knowing where you currently stand minute to minute, second to second. It's really quite powerful in that. As we enter a more stressed state, a more sympathetic fight or flight type of state, HRV tends to go down. And you mentioned the frequency domain, in which you can look at the high frequency versus low frequency, where high frequency is sympathetic and low frequency is parasympathetic vagus nerve function. There's another way to measure it as well, which is time domain. And in the time domain, we're looking at the number of milliseconds between beats of the heart averaged over a period of time. And so that measurement is in milliseconds. And what we're seeing with regards to those milliseconds is, are we increasing the number of milliseconds of variability between beats of the heart? The more variability, the higher the time domain frequency number shows up as. That marker then tells us that we are actually headed towards the parasympathetic state, turning on our vagus nerve, entering this recovery-based mode. Rest, digest, recover state is being activated. So that's a really important measure to understand.
Yeah, and just to sort of bring this back up to a level that I think the non-technical people will be able to appreciate. Basically, you want the number that the device, whatever device you're using, you want that number to go up. So if you start out and you've been pretty stressed and you're looking at it at 10 o'clock at night and you're still sweating about the day, and your number turns out to look like 20, somebody else it might be 40. But in that state, you're having a 20 show up on your Apple Watch. Okay. What you want to do is get yourself into a more relaxed state that's healthier, lower inflammation, lower stress, better sleep. And all of that happens, you'll see your heart rate variability number start to increase. So your goal basically is, if you're a 20, you want to get it to a 40 or a 50 or 60. If you're already at 40, you want to get it to 60, 70, 80, because everybody's number is going to be different, even though you might be in the same health state. So don't worry about the absolute number. Worry about how you're moving it. And if you see yourself moving to a higher number, that's a good thing. See yourself moving to a lower number, not such a good thing.
I think this is such an important thing to understand when it comes to heart rate variability and HRV measurements. There's a few very important caveats here. Higher is better than low, period, across the board for HRV. The higher, the better, the more parasympathetic activation and the more balance there is between the sympathetics and the parasympathetics, and the signaling to the heart is more variable. And that means both systems are working really well. Number two, choose one device, stick with that one device. Comparing between devices is going to throw it off. So very important to understand. If, like, I've had people that have an Apple Watch and an Oura Ring, and their measurements are completely different. And that's because the sensors that they're using are different. The measurement that they're taking is in a different spot. The pulse is going to be slightly different in the wrist than it is in the finger. And then in addition to that, the actual measurement pattern that each and the algorithm that each of these devices is using is going to be different. So don't compare even between yourself, between different devices. So those are major, major caveats. And there's one last one, which is do not compare with other people. There are too many variables. There's genetic variables, there's sleep-based, there's inflammation-based, there's heart-based markers, neural-based markers that are all going to be individual. So the only person that you should compare your HRV with is you yesterday. And the goal should always just be better than yesterday. That is the ultimate goal when it comes to what HRV measurement is and how to utilize it to optimize your health. If you can get your HRV increasing over time, slightly above average, better than yesterday, and trending to a point where you raise your average over time, that is a phenomenal sign. The most common thing that I see, so I measure this with a lot of my patients, I have them either share their specific HRV numbers with me, or I have a platform that allows me to see what their data is when they upload it on a daily basis, and it happens automatically, which is really nice. And I can go in and see the trends, and we can compare, oh, your steps were down, but your HRV was up. So this was a recovery day. Okay, but on this day, you overdid it, and your HRV is down. Getting to see what those trend values are, if we can trend upwards, that is a phenomenal sign that you're heading in the direction of turning on that vagus nerve and turning on that parasympathetic rest, digest, recover system. So HRV is this huge measure that needs to be utilized, and it helps to provide this insight into how your body is recovering, period. The higher, the better.
And a quick biohacking note, nothing kills your HRV faster than alcohol. I mean, it just drops it like a stone. So not to be a teetotaler or anything like that, but just recognize that not only, we talked about it on a previous episode, how about what it does to your mitochondria, what it does to your sleep. Well, let me tell you, it's going to shoot your HRV as well.
So I'll mention a case. I have a patient that I'm working with right now who did a couple of things. He decided he didn't like his Apple Watch. He wasn't wearing it while he was sleeping, so he ended up buying an Oura Ring. And from that Oura Ring, we started tracking his data. And he was having about 1 to 2 drinks a night, 3 nights a week, 4 nights a week before utilizing this. And his HRV was sitting in the 25 to 30 mark every night on average. He decided, this was after Christmas in January, he decided, okay, I'm going to cut it off. We're going to do February as, I believe it was sober.
Dry February. Yeah.
Dry February, that's the one. So dry Feb. And we compared his average HRV for the entire month of January to the entire month of February. And we saw, and in addition, he was also using a vagus nerve stimulator. So he started the stimulator slightly before and then added it in with the dry February process. And his HRV average went up by 22% from January to February. The average HRV was 22% higher in 1 month when he cut off alcohol and was using his vagus nerve stimulator. So I just thought that was a phenomenal point to drive home, especially with that point of alcohol having that effect. Even a single drink can have a massive effect on that HRV number. So be really aware of that. But HRV for me is like the holy grail of numbers that we should be tracking on a daily basis to see where we're trending.
So you've got your holy grail, and I'm going to give my holy grail now. To be truthful, HRV is really, really important. As I said, it gives insight into what I think is one of the 4 most important pillars of our bodies and our lives and life itself, which is your immune state. And you're looking at it through the autonomic functions. My favorite, or mine, the one that I think is so critical, it's not exactly non-invasive, but it's a wearable. And thank God that we now have them that are non-prescription, but it's the Stelo continuous glucose monitoring. CGM is a truly miraculous breakthrough. Not necessarily so technically difficult, although I'm sure there's a fair amount of technical difficulty associated with making one. But what it measures, which is basically your minute by minute level of blood sugar, is tremendous. It's telling you how your metabolism is functioning. It's telling you how your insulin levels and glucose and how your body is making energy is how efficient it is and how healthy it is. And that leads to all sorts of issues. We now know mitochondrial dysfunction is underpinning of probably 90% of all diseases, all chronic diseases that we are experiencing. So I think giving people insight into specific numbers that they can look at and see the impact of eating something. You used to just sit and say, oh, I'm thirsty, I'm going to grab a lemonade, drink a lemonade. Well, now you can see what a 12-ounce can of Country Time lemonade is doing to your blood sugar levels. I mean, you're getting this huge, huge spike. And I think that we thought of it as sort of benign. I'll have a Coke, I'll have a Sprite, I'll have a Pepsi. What it does to your blood sugar levels is kind of horrifying. Okay. And now, but it's not just junk food. It's also, okay, what does this type of food do to me? And this is, again, much like you said with HRV, don't necessarily compare yourself to somebody else. You can do it a little bit more because obviously there's some absolute numbers that you're getting, but with respect to what a food might do to you, might not do that to me. And what does it to me might not do it to you. So there's a lot of individuality and individual medicine that you have to take responsibility for with this information. But it's a fascinating tool. And we'll get to it. But the tie-in to that is also they now have continuous ketone monitors. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But that's my sort of holy grail measure, is knowing what your blood sugar and how your insulin levels are functioning at all times.
Yeah, I think it can't be understated just how important that metabolic activity is, understanding what's going on. I do want to just mention, I love the devices. I think they're great. They're not measuring blood sugar. They're measuring the interstitial fluid sugar glucose levels because it doesn't go directly into the bloodstream. So they are about 30 minutes behind the actual blood sugar, but they're still phenomenal, and they're still the right tool and just an absolute miraculous thing for us to be able to measure something as important as blood sugar from a second to second, minute to minute basis. I think wearables overall are providing this insight that we've never experienced before. You would years ago just go to the doctor, get your blood work done, and you see your A1C is at 7.3. Oh my goodness, like what's going on? And that's an average of 3 months, but you only get that when you do the blood work. Then we had the advent of these fingerprint and blood testing tools, and they were great, but you're generally doing that once, maybe twice a day. So you're just checking to see where you are in the morning, maybe checking to see where you're at night, and you're hurting your finger. It's not exactly fun to do those sharp pricks. I've done it. They suck. I've seen my family members. My grandfather used to do it every day. I hated it. And he lost all feeling in that finger because he did it for so many years. And diabetes, like that's one of the crappy side effects of poor blood sugar, is needing to check all the time. Now these devices are sitting there and they can tell you the effect of rice or the effect of fries or the effect of steak, or what did that meal do to you? And not even just meals. What did that stressor do to you? What happened when you were in that meeting or you got called into the office? Did your blood sugar spike when that happened? And it happens so many more. Yeah, absolutely. Exercise is massive. And how quickly did it drop down is another big piece. How resilient is your body in being able to regulate and bring it back down into that optimal range of those blood sugar markers? So this is a huge one. I don't think we can understate how important that metabolic activity piece is.
Yep, for sure. So what's another metric that I gave mine, you gave yours?
Yeah, let's go back and forth. So my big next one is sleep tracking for sure. And so I'm going back to the same types of devices that we talked about with regards to HRV, but our last episode, we talked about the glymphatic system. And I want to bring in the sleep piece because we talked about the 5 sleep cycles. So I'm quickly going to dig into this for anybody that didn't listen to that episode. But sleep is something that we generally take for granted and we forget about, and we say, okay, get your 8 hours, but most of us don't. And so sleep tracking and understanding how much time each of your sleep cycles is, understanding how quickly you go into deep sleep, how many times, what percentage of time you're spending in a deep sleep state, and light versus REM, I think that is huge. So when it comes to measuring this, I personally have had my Oura Ring for nearly 7 years at this point. I have lots of data. And so I can tell you, I woke up this morning, I knew I didn't have a great sleep last night. I went on and I checked, and lo and behold, 70 was my sleep score. Terrible. So it had to do with the fact that I was waiting up for the laundry to finish and I had to wait to put the load from the washer to the dryer. I fell asleep on the couch, was feeling all sorts of neck issues when I got out of that. Went upstairs, went to sleep, and my wife's alarm went off super early this morning. So she had some work things she had to go to. So this all affected my sleep, and there's my 70 sleep score. Versus there's days where I go in and sleep and I get my 95, and that's a phenomenal feeling. And I know that I got my not only time, but I spent enough time in each of the zones of sleep. So there's three stages. There's from an awake state, you drop down into the lowest or the highest stage of sleep is REM sleep. That's called rapid eye movement or REM sleep. And that's where dreaming truly occurs. And that tends to occur later on in sleep. We tend to see more REM sleep in the third, fourth, fifth cycle of sleep. We're supposed to go through 5 per night. Some people don't. Some people cycle through 4, and those are the people that wake up and they're not doing well.
Some people only cycle through 2 or 3,
which is crazy.
Well, yes, but for some people, they are what are called genetics short sleepers. It's about 1 to 3% of the population, and for them, they're very, very lucky, but they don't require it, and we don't really know why yet. But we think it might have to do with the fact that their lymphatic system is more efficient. It's functioning while they're awake in a much more efficient way so that the metabolic waste that's getting generated is cleared out continuously, as opposed to for most of us where, probably 80 to 90% of it is getting cleared out during that one of the stages of sleep. Not the REM sleep stage, it's the deep sleep stage. One of the things I'll just mention about REM sleep that we didn't talk about before is that during REM sleep, that's when your memories are consolidated. That's when long-term potentiation of the connections are made. That's when information is moving from your hippocampus into your cortex. That thing you learned today that even by the end of the day was still sort of something, well, yeah, just found that out today kind of thing. And then the next morning when you wake up, it's just different how you know it. You know it more as part of who you are. And it's true because what's happened is there's things called thalamic loops that are taking place where they're literally carrying information from your hippocampus where that long-term memory is stored, but it moves it into the cortex and integrates it into the actual network. So it actually becomes part of the network that's in your cortex and how you think, which is sort of a fascinating way that the brain works. But during that REM sleep, you have these very brief phenomenon that are called sleep spindles, which correspond to these thalamic loops that are running, and then other things called K complexes. And the sleep microarchitecture is corresponding to things that are actually happening in your brain reorganizing itself during the sleep stage.
Yeah, no question. Those REM cycles are so important in that memory consolidation phase and improving your ability to have clear cognitive thought and putting these pieces of information into the cortex. The analogy that I use for this is REM sleep is kind of the filing away of these important documents into the algorithm that you then use to function through life. And it's taking these files that are sitting on a desk in the in pile, and you're putting them into the areas where they need to be there for common functionality afterwards.
Yep. I think that's
You're also probably clearing out a lot of the out information, right? Things that happen that don't matter or that didn't have an emotion tied to it or didn't have any relevance tied to it. You're clearing it out and saying, yeah, I forgot about that. And so getting rid of a lot of that information during that time is also very important. It's just allowing you to file everything away into its appropriate areas so that you can either use it or not bother with it.
And keeping the important stuff. I think that the piece of this that's really important is that the measurements that we're making of sleep cycles that you can do with an Oura Ring, you can do with an Apple Watch, the way they take those measurements is important. It's not a direct measure of your EEG. Okay, that would be something that would be separate. And there are wearables that you can do for that. But these are really measuring things like your movement, sounds that you're making, your breathing rate, that these devices are monitoring in order to sort of extrapolate from those biomarkers what state of sleep you're in. So if you're looking for a much more detailed understanding of the architecture of your sleep, you are going to need to move away from a ring or a watch or something like that. You need to move to something more like a Muse headband, or I think that Philips has one, Smart Sleep or something, headband that you can put on and wear, and it has EEG electrodes that will be measuring your sleep. Now, it's not full, what's referred to as sleep somnography. Okay. So if you had a real sleep problem or you wanted to really dive deep into your sleep patterns, you could go into a sleep lab where they would strap you up with all sorts of different equipment and a full EEG pattern, and you could have a really interesting, session understanding the architecture of your sleep. Of course, you'd be sleeping in, somebody else's bed in a, those things. I always have a little bit of a question. They now have home somnography sets, which I think, even though they don't collect quite as much information, I think it's more relevant information because you're sleeping in your own. But then again, you're also sleeping with equipment on, so that might disturb your sleep as well.
So I've done it. I've experienced this, just as a quick side note, and it sucks. So I did it on site at a different location. I had all of the wires hooked up. I had to shave certain areas, which really sucked. It was mostly on the legs. I didn't understand why there were leads on my legs, but I wanted to know my motion patterns and a lot of different markers. And I can attest to the fact that I think I got 3.5 hours of sleep in an 8-hour window that I was there. But it was enough information for them, which was great. I got some wonderful information. I had some breathing issues, some sleep apnea. Hopefully that's all resolved at this point. But that was a really crappy experience that I had to go through. But the data that you can pull when you have 24 leads on you is something else, right? Like, this ring is not going to do anything close to what you're going to get from 24 leads directly attached to your body. And none of these tools are diagnostic outside of those actual diagnostic tools. The wearables are not diagnostic, but they're great for trend analysis. Right? Knowing the actual sleep stages, you need proper somnography to understand a proper EEG measurement through sleep time. These are great for just tracking trends, and certain devices have a lot more data that they can analyze and pull from, which allows them to have a greater degree of accuracy, which can help provide that. And so those 5 sleep cycles, we want to go through REM, we want to go through light, and we want to go through deep sleep, or all 3 of those areas being part of each cycle. We want to spend more time in deep in the first 2 cycles, more light kind of generally occurring throughout, and REM sleep more in the last 2 cycles. And of those 5 cycles, the percentage of time that we want to spend in each stage is a very simple analysis of 50 and 25. So 25% of the time we want to spend in a REM sleep state. Anywhere between 20 and 30 is great, but 25 is a great, easy way to remember that. So REM sleep should be around 25. Light sleep should be around 50% of your sleep. And deep sleep should again be around 25%. So 25 deep, 50 light, 25 for REM. Close to that is a great sign that you're going through those cycles if you're getting enough time and you're feeling refreshed in the morning, and you're noticing that we're spending enough time in each of those areas for your lymphatic system to turn on and function at a high level during deep sleep, for your memory consolidation to take place when you're in your REM sleep, and just for rest and recovery and signals of the vagus nerve to go out while you're just in the entirety of your sleep patterns. Huge piece to this puzzle. When you sleep and melatonin is activated and released throughout the body, melatonin has an effect to shut down the sympathetic nervous system. It's sympatholytic, meaning that it shuts down sympathetic activity and allows your vagus nerve to work unhindered, meaning that it allows it to go out and send its signals to the immune system to regulate and optimize recovery, rebuilding. That occurs during sleep. So if you're not getting enough sleep and you're not able to send those signals as effectively, you're not spending enough time going through those cycles, vagus nerve is not given the opportunity to do its job of recovery. And that's huge.
I love melatonin and I love synthesizing it. I love doing things that help you synthesize it. And you say that melatonin helps to shut down the sympathetic nervous system. But when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, it has the effect of reducing the amount of melatonin that you synthesize. So that's why we always talk about the fact that, and where does melatonin come from? It comes from serotonin. And so what you don't want to do is have that sympathetic nervous system active all the time, because it's not only going to disrupt your sleep, it's also going to disrupt your mood. And serotonin is really important for that. So again, great measurement. I think it's a wonderful one. I would say to people that if they're really interested in it, you can move beyond the wristwatches and the rings and get the headbands. My suspicion is, or my feeling is, that you want to wear it and not necessarily take the measurements that you do for the first week or two very seriously, because it itself is probably going to be something you need to get comfortable wearing to sleep. But once you do, then I think you can start to take those measurements very seriously, and they're going to be beneficial.
You also need to note that for the first 2 weeks that the devices are being utilized, they're all collecting data for their algorithms that are based on your averages. But at the beginning, there are no averages to apply to your personal case. So you need to wait for getting at least to the 2-week mark before you start taking those measurements as important markers or as accurate measurements of what's happening inside your body and providing that information. I've seen people that started their Oura Ring journey and they said on night 1 my HRV was 12 and on night 2 it was 83. And it's trying to figure you out. It's trying to learn you. The algorithm of each of these tools is first learning about you and then providing the information. And so having years of data on my device, I can trust it a little bit more than somebody who's brand new to these devices. So take that with a grain of salt. Don't jump into that data point right away. Know that it takes time for it to learn you and your patterns and your averages, and then utilize it going forward.
Think about when you first step on a scale and the little measurement swings like this before it gets to actually telling you what you weigh. Or when you're measuring what your heart rate is, it takes the first couple beats and all of a sudden it says you got your heart rate's at 160 and then it's down at 30, and it has to settle in to figure out over a long enough period of time, okay, what really is the average. So I think it's the same concept.
Let's jump over to your next favorite wearable health metric.
It would be very similar. It's blood pressure. I mean, I think that, the idea of keeping track of how day-to-day stresses are affecting your blood pressure. Very few people have a sphygmometer at home and, puts the cuff on and measures blood pressure. But, keeping track of your blood pressure is really important. I think it goes without saying, but it's worth mentioning that high blood pressure is an epidemic, and it's a silent epidemic, and it's a silent killer. There are a lot of people out there who don't realize that they have high blood pressure. In fact, they're symptomatic and they don't even know what the symptoms are. And so maybe as almost like a health service, message, we should probably explain what some of those symptoms are, so that if you're experiencing symptoms of high blood pressure and don't even recognize it, then maybe it'll spur you to get in to see a doctor. And I realize I'm a little bit scattered here with this, but most people will go into a doctor's office and register a blood pressure reading that is not their normal blood pressure. They're doing it under what are stressful circumstances, being in a doctor's office, even if it's just for a checkup. They're there. It's usually not in a setting that's where they're living their regular life. And not only is it only getting one reading per year, it's not really providing any real benefit. So what you need to do is monitor it. And I think the fact that most people don't own a sphygmometer, but they can get an Oura Ring or a watch or something like that measures blood pressure, which is a pretty fascinating thing that they can do, that is something that I think really people need. So maybe as a clinician, you can sort of explain some of the symptoms of high blood pressure that most people don't recognize. And then we can talk about, the damage it's doing to your kidneys, the damage it's doing to your blood vessels, the damage the contribution that it has to atherosclerosis. I mean, it's probably the trigger for most, formations of plaque.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. These symptoms need to be things that are at the forefront of everybody's mind when they're looking at these things and truly noting. And this is something that I've personally experienced. So if people don't know my journey, I've been very unhealthy for many, many years prior to coming into the functional medicine world and really working on my own health. There was a time I remember I was in college. I was at the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario here, and went into the doctor's office, got my blood pressure taken. It was 145/92. for anybody who knows what blood pressure should be, it should be around 110 over 70, 120 over 80 at kind of the maximum. And I was sitting at 145 over 92. I had hypertension. Now, to your point of it was being tested once a year in a cold, crappy office of the medical doctor, ultimately I shouldn't have had that blood pressure because I was in my teens and my almost 20s at that point. So it shouldn't get to that point anyway, and I should be generally calm. But white coat hypertension does absolutely exist, that you're going into the state because you're just happening to be in that environment. That said, having experienced this, some of the symptoms I didn't realize, and this was something I didn't even know I had high blood pressure until that moment. It was trying to figure out what signs or what my body was trying to tell me that then started to light up as these little light bulbs saying, oh, that was something or that was something. So a big one was headaches. Headaches were much more rampant. They were tension type in my case. Luckily, I didn't have migraines, but that is something that is associated for sure. Headaches was a big one. Second one, frequent urination. I was going to the bathroom more often. A lot of people have this very common occurrence, and the kidneys are heavily linked to this. What blood pressure is, remember, is you have this tube through which blood is flowing, and the pressure in the blood vessel is dictated by how much fluid is flowing through and how rigid or how flexible that tube is through which your blood is flowing. The less flexible your blood vessel is, the less flexible that tube is, the higher the pressure is going to build. And that is a direct sign of, do you have more leniency, more mobility, more ability for there to be flow and a lower pressure level to be experienced through that blood vessel? Where the smallest blood vessels that have a very unique and very important function based on blood pressure is in the kidneys. So you mentioned this. I'd love to get into the kidneys and how the blood flow through the kidneys. If you know the anatomy of the kidney, you know, like looking at the histology and understanding just the tiny little tubules and how intricate that entire system is. It's based on, if there's high pressure, the fluid is actually leaking out. And it's meant to do that. We want to leak it out. But if there's too much pressure, more fluid gets leaked out, and it does damage to that intricate system. And so kidney damage and breakdown is very, very important to look at. So frequent urination is a sign because you're pumping out and releasing more, and dehydration follows that pretty heavily. So if you're not hydrating well, if you're feeling like you're parched all the time, it can be linked very heavily to obesity, blood sugar issues as well. There is a definite correlation between those. So keep an eye on those. And I'm sure I'm missing a couple that probably are sticking out high in your head. So go ahead and point out any other symptoms that may be necessary too.
No, I mean, obviously there's the challenge of just simply getting up out of a chair and feeling lightheaded or feeling that's just a change in the pressure. Sometimes that's hypotension, and that can just be lack of salt or something in your bloodstream. What you want to do is monitor how your movement changes how you feel. If you get lightheaded and you get, that can be a sign of just your body not properly regulating your blood pressure. Again, that's not necessarily a sign that you have hypertension. It can be hypotension, which is the opposite, too low blood pressure. It could simply be that you're overly dehydrated or you don't have enough electrolytes or other things. A lot of people who are very healthy, exercise a lot, will find that after sweating a lot, they might be lightheaded. That's not a concern for high blood pressure. But I think what you want is to just be aware of what the cause is of that symptom. If that symptom isn't due to the healthy things I'm talking about, then it could be a sign that you're suffering with hypertension. And it usually goes along with a headache, a head rush, things like that. There's also the kidney things you're talking about is what's in the urine that also can be a sign that there's problems with blood pressure. So you want to have a physician or a healthcare provider who's knowledgeable, do that urinalysis and look at what's in the urine. In fact, we'll get back to that in a minute of some of the things we'd love to be able to do at home. But I think hypertension is also a really dangerous thing from the standpoint of, your larger blood vessels as well. You're talking about the small vessels in the kidney and where the dilution or the dialysis-like activities taking that cleansing of the blood by getting rid of waste, by having this fluid come out. But in the larger blood vessels, that high blood pressure that's sustained, when you talk about 145 over 92, you say, well, which one's dangerous? The 92 is still below the 110 that you said before. Yeah, but it's that constant level of pressure. The spikes that, drive it, just during the beating of the heart that drive it up to 145. Yeah, that's not healthy. That's dangerous too. But it's that constant level where it's never dropping below 92, where you start to get concerned, because what happens in the larger vessels is it's not just pulsing, it's staying expanded. And what you end up getting is damage to the inner lining of the blood vessel. And that leads to healing. And that healing involves cholesterol. It involves, fatty streaks that form across where that might be like sort of a crack, if you think of in that blood vessel. You have a fatty streak. That's where the body is trying to heal it. And when the body heals, what does it bring up? It brings up inflammation. So you have inflammation present. You have the body trying to heal. And that's when you start to oxidize fatty acids. And they end up being an oxidized fatty acid is considered very dangerous and is driving your ultimate macrophage and necrotic tissue, et cetera, that grows, and you form this calcified plaque in the blood vessel. It's a long cascade. We've talked about it before, but hypertension is really one of the most important triggers of that process right from the very beginning. So that's why I think that measuring your blood pressure and really understanding what it is, not just from the symptoms, which are important for you to recognize, but just keeping track of your blood pressure is a really important thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm very happy to say that my most recent blood pressure measurement was significantly better in the 112 over 78 range. So we're in a much better position, and that's something that you can do. I think one of the things that I want today's episode to kind of resonate and bring home to people is none of these things are a death sentence for anybody, and they're not a life sentence for anybody. You can change every single one of these. That's what's really cool about wearable health metrics is when we know what's going on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute to second basis, you can do things to make positive changes take place. We can shift your body into a healthier state. You can truly become healthier. And for some people, not for everybody, but wearable health data points can help drive an empowerment to say, I know I can do better. I think I can do better. I'm going to try something that's moving me in the right direction. So I just really want to drive that point home.
And I think that's a really important, I want to riff on that just for a second, because I think it's so critical. When you have something that's you're told by a doctor, going to that doctor once a year or once every 5 years or whatever, and they put you on a medication, okay? And you then start taking that medication. You might have side effects. You might decide to drop off. You have no idea whether it's working or not until you go back to see the doctor. And you go back to see the doctor in, 6 months, a year, to check up on whether it's working or not. That's not the way you need to do this. That's not the way you need to solve your problem. What you need to do is you need to have constant monitoring of that problem and use Hippocrates said it, use food, use exercise, use sleep, use stress levels in your life, use other things that are behavioral that can change those measurements. And you may find that you don't need the medication. You don't need that. What you need to do is change a few things in your life that you were doing wrong. Experiment a little. Be a scientist. Be your own scientist on yourself. As what is it in The Martian? He said, "Yeah, I got to science the you know what out of this. Science the you know what out of yourself. And go and be your own healer. With these measurements, you're going to be able to be creative and figure out what works for you."
My really, really great friend and mentor, Sachin Patel, who I don't think you've met, but I'm going to have him on the podcast soon at some point again. He came on a while ago. He had this wonderful line, and it's kind of the mission statement of his company, Living Proof. And I used to work with them, which was really great. That's where I learned a lot. His line is, the doctor of the future is the patient themselves. I think if we give away the empowerment of what can change from a health metric standpoint to our doctor, to any of the doctors, whether they're a functional doctor or not, if we give away that empowerment, we give away that responsibility to somebody else, then we are doing ourselves a major disservice. I think taking back that control, taking back that empowerment is key here. And that's where wearable health data metrics can really come in for people that don't get anxious about these things. Take them as purely objective measures. None of these should be things that you're comparing with other people. I remember when Aura Ring became this big deal. I had already had it for a few years, and Jennifer Aniston and Kim Kardashian were literally having a fight over who was going to have a higher sleep score. This was a thing that they started doing on social media, and I was like, listen, like I'm happy that you're both trying to get to your 95 to 100 sleep score or whatever that you're trying to get to. Go for it. But stop showing everybody that they should be comparing with each other, right? Like, let's empower people to take this data and use it as objective data points to help provide that empowerment of trying to get better. And sure, if it involves you having a better sleep score, great, because it's not directly tied to your metric being compared metric to metric. But don't use it to become more anxious about your health. If you say that, oh, my HRV is 20, well, that's not a bad thing. It's just something that you can improve if you do the right tools, if you do the right things, if you make the right changes to allow for that change to occur.
And I think we got to also say, there's lots of people out there who have cholesterol levels of 300 and are doing fine. And there are people who are having heart attacks and they had a cholesterol level that was, 160. So it's not the measurement that matters. It's how healthy you are. And the best metric is typically, how do you feel? Do you feel better as a result of doing these things? These measurements are helpful. They're empowering you. They're giving you the opportunity to see how the interventions that you're making for yourself in your life, how you're optimizing your health, how well they're working. Don't compare them to other people. Until you walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, you're not living their lives. So you're not doing that. Don't try to compare across different devices, different people. It's not the way to do this. The way to do this is to see what you've got. Don't obsess about it. See what your measurements are, and then make the changes to see if you can move them in a better direction. And remember, when you say, oh, but I've got high blood pressure. Okay. And you're going to go take a medication that the doctor gives you that was run in a clinical study of people that aren't you. Okay. And that medication may have worked really well for 1 out of 5 of those people. And that may have been enough to get that approval, that it worked in 1 out of 5 people. The other 4 out of 5 people, it didn't do any good. Okay. But that doesn't change the fact that they're now going to prescribe it to everyone. Okay. That doesn't make any sense. What makes sense is you've got the tool now to measure, go make the changes, see what works. Maybe it isn't salt. Maybe you don't have to take salt out of your diet. Maybe what you need to do is go running. Maybe you don't need to stop eating, steak. What you need to stop eating is, potatoes. You got to figure that out.
You're absolutely right. I want to be conscious of time, so we've got a little bit of time left. I want to get into a couple of honorable mentions of wearable metrics that I'm a big fan of when I'm looking at it for myself and for my patients. So honorable mention number 1 for me is respiratory rate. How frequently are you breathing? It's a direct sign of your breathing efficiency. It's a direct sign of your oxygen and carbon dioxide capacity, how well you do with higher levels of carbon dioxide and how much oxygen your body needs. The goal should be a lower number here. We want to be more efficient with your respiratory rate. So that's one that I would highly recommend that you take a look at and just gauge where you're at. So the average respiratory rate is generally between close to 15, but it's somewhere between 11 and 18 for most people. Males tend to be lower than females just in general. There's about an average for males is around 14 and an average, or 15 for males, and 16 for females. And what you want to do is you want to trend below that and ideally get to as efficient as possible. If you can get your breath rate into the 12, 13 zone as a male or 13, 14 zone as a female, you're doing really, really well with your efficiencies. And so this is an important honorable mention that I have. Do you have one that you want to throw in?
I have an honorable mention in the sense that it's not a device. but it's a measurement that's easy for you to take. And it may be, at least according to some people, including Peter Attia, he's a big proponent of this, you know where I'm going with this, is VO2 max. It's not something that you're going to get from a wearable. What you need to do is you need to go out on a treadmill, and it's very simple. It's a 12-minute run. I mean, there's other measures that can be used also, but get onto a treadmill, run as fast as you possibly can in 12 minutes. And then there are online calculators that you can use, and they'll give you your percentage with respect to your age group, where you are. You know, you want to increase your VO2 max. That is, the difference in mortality risk associated with being in the top 20% versus the bottom 20% of VO2 max. It's like 5 times more risk that you're going to die in the low group versus the high group. It's not like 5% or 50%. It's 500%. Okay. So you want to do, and it feeds into diet, it feeds into exercise, it feeds into sleep, it feeds into how well your mitochondria are functioning, et cetera. If you can get your VO2 max up, that's great. And it's an easy thing. You don't need to go to a doctor to measure. You can do fancy VO2 max measurements with breathing apparatuses and you're still on a treadmill. So just go to town, run as far and as fast as you can. You should get off there. It's not pleasant. You're going to get off there and you're going to be exhausted. I mean, you should be literally lying on the ground, huffing and puffing. But that number of how far you can go is literally probably the most important metric about how healthy you are and your prognosis for longevity.
Yeah, and there is absolute correlation with regards to VO2 max and breath rate, breath efficiencies. It's not 100%, obviously, but the more efficient your breathing rate is, the higher your VO2 max generally will be. So this is a great kind of wearable device version of checking, but on the breath rate side, VO2 max is the gold standard, no question about it. So there are ways to even exercise to train yourself for a higher VO2 max and to boost that number over time. And this is an absolute no-brainer. VO2 max is top of the list. I've got one more honorable mention that I want to bring up, and that is your step count. I think people think they walk way more than they do. Your activity levels are generally a measure of how you think you're doing. But we are notoriously bad at measuring our macros. We're notoriously bad at measuring our calories. And as humans, we are notoriously bad at measuring our steps. So I highly recommend utilizing just even the most simple pedometer or Fitbit or something to measure your step count on a day-to-day basis and have that goal of above 8,700. 10,000 is a great goal. I think it's a really good number for most people to try to get to. If you're on a treadmill like JP and you're going to town for 12 miles every morning, you're going to hit that before you even have breakfast, which is great. For most people, they're not doing that. And so checking to see how active you are, how many times you're sitting during the day, how often you're getting up, looking at your average daily activity levels. Are you standing enough? Are you moving enough? What's going on with your leg muscles? Those are huge markers to know whether you are dealing with the physical stress of sedentary life or not. And that is a great marker. So I really want to just point to something that's super simple as step count to help dictate whether sedentary lifestyle is an issue for a certain person or not.
Yeah, and I'll just add, you called me out for the fact that I do run a lot. I try to do it twice a day. I run in the morning and then a little bit in the afternoon. And just as I bring it up frequently and people know it, but I'll tell you, it's not the best way to do it. It's not the best way for me to be doing this. I do it because that's what my lifestyle permits. But the best way to do it is not to run 8 miles in the morning and 3 or 4 miles in the afternoon. The best way would be to walk 1 mile or a half a mile every hour or so.
And for most people, the sad thing is for most people, the lifestyle does not allow for that to occur, right? Like if you could go for a 1 mile walk every hour on the hour, please go for it and do it. Like I would much rather that be an available tool, but we're not hunter-gatherers anymore. That's not how we're living.
But that's how we evolved. So our bodies are really designed for that.
We're built to do that.
Walking desks give you that chance. I mean, if you have the ability to get a walking desk, get an elevated desk, put a little treadmill underneath it, and as a result, you can get on there and walk half a mile, walk for 5-10 minutes every hour. That is the best thing for your body that you could possibly do from an exercise standpoint. Yeah, you can get up in the morning early and run. It's good for weight loss to do it then. It's good for your cardiovascular. It's good for VO2 max. All that's important. But just getting there and walking, a walking desk is a great thing. It sort of grew, and then I sort of think it plateaued. I'd like to see another growth phase of that. Maybe just to sort of bring this to conclusion, you and I talked about sort of our wish list of things that we wish they had. And these might go beyond wearables, but home equipment that if you had it, it would be just really fascinating. And the first one for me would be, and I actually think that somebody made this. I saw one online. I think an engineering company in somewhere in Scandinavia made this as sort of on spec to see if anybody would be interested in it. And I'm going to raise my hand right now. If anybody knows the people that developed this, I'm interested. Okay. It's a home CRP test. Okay. C-reactive protein, great measurement of your inflammation levels. All you have to do is like a finger stick thing. You put a finger on a pad, it pricks your finger and it takes a tiny drop of blood and it measures what your C-reactive protein level is. That would be a phenomenal thing to have, to be able to track that on a regular basis. Because I think a lot of people don't have any idea, even with heart rate variability, because there's variability among people, they don't really know what their immune system is doing from a minute to minute basis or a day to day basis or even a month to month basis. They don't realize, and we know how important our immune system is for organ regulation, brain function, overall health, and of our metabolism. It's critical. And so to have that information, to be able to start using that again as a data point to modulate how we live our lives to see if we can bring that inflammation down, I think that's a huge, huge advance. And I'm surprised that nobody's jumped at it, but I would jump at it in a heartbeat.
I'm sure it's coming. If it doesn't, it'll be us that do this for sure. And the one that I would love to see happen a little bit more easily, it does exist in functional lab testing as well, but the one that I would love to see is an omega ratio. So your ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 currently in your body. And we know that omega quant is a great test for that, in particular, your omega ratios. Knowing that we have a good amount of omega-3s and having that omega-3 balance helps to eliminate and lower that inflammatory activity pretty significantly. So I think that would be one that I would love to see attached to like a wearable CGM type of device or CRP device, something like that, almost like a biohacking constant blood interstitial fluid measurement of where your body currently stands. And I don't think we're far off from something like this. I think we're still looking very near future to be able to see these markers popping up for sure.
Yeah, I just, now that I'm looking back across what we've talked about, because it's always an organic conversation, you're not sure where it's going to go. I would say with the exception of sleep, which I think ultimately really does also touch inflammation and metabolism, pretty much everything we've talked about and all of these measurements are ways to indirectly get to how's your immune system functioning, what's your level of inflammation, and how's your metabolism functioning. How well is your body processing oxygen? How well is it processing fuel? What are your levels of omega-3s and omega-6s? What's your blood glucose level? I mean, all of that is really about two fundamental pillars of health that we talk about, which are immune system and metabolism and your autonomic nervous system. The one that we didn't talk about, which I think is maybe we go out with this one, is there are measurements that are used right now where you breathe into something and it tells you the state of your microbiome, because that's the fourth piece that we got: the autonomic nervous system, metabolism, immune system, and your microbiome. And so there are breath tests that sort of tell you, at a rudimentary level, how your microbiome is functioning, at least in your upper digestive tract.
And they're measuring your hydrogen and methane gas production and specific like sulfides and whatnot that are being released. Those would be great. I would love for microbiome testing to be as simple as a breath test rather than needing to do a stool analysis. But unfortunately, that's the state of the world that we are currently in. That said, we have access. And so if you're really interested in getting these things done, reach out to us. I do all of these functional lab tests with a lot of my patients on a daily basis. So reach out to us if that is something that definitely speaks to you, or if you're interested. Go to healthupgraded.com and learn more about kind of the process and how we work with clients to help optimize and upgrade their health. That said, I think this was a great episode. It was a fun, organic little conversation, a nice little episode with just the two of us. And any final words?
No, I think we hit it out of the park. Let's get this out to everybody. And as you say, if you've made it to this far in the podcast, we thank you for that. Share this with somebody who needs it, who could benefit, a biohacker out there or a future biohacker that we want to convert into keeping aware of how their bodies are functioning and ways in which they can take control of their own health.
I love it. Take back control. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you all on the next one.